Welcome to the near the end of the fifth season of the Speaker Series. Next month we'll end the series for this year. We'll take the summer off and begin again in September. Just to let you know, we've received a number of abstracts for next year. We still have some spaces open, and we're always interested if anybody has an abstract to send to participate in the series for next year. Please send it to Peter and I. Let me move to the activities for tonight. Please remember to mute yourself when the speaker starts so we don't get any ambient noise or conversation coming through. And if you want to ask a question or make a comment, please use the chat function. Just run your cursor down to the bottom of the black screen, find chat. If it doesn't say somewhere over there, it doesn't say chat, go over to the right where it has more. Click that, and that's where the chat will show up. You can, when you hit that, a little box will show up in the bottom right, and there'll be a space for you to type in comments and questions, which we will direct to the speaker at the end of the presentation. He can't see that because he fills up everything, the screen with his slides. Now, tonight's speaker is Kevin Doyle. Now, I'm trying to figure out, it's a very Italian name, so it's very, very different. I go to church with another Italian, Colleen O'Brien. But Kevin holds geology degrees from the University of Dayton and the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, which is one of the two schools one of my grandsons is going to have to attend when he moves from Mike Halpert's University, University of Wisconsin-La Crosse. Kevin is the head of SABR's Southwest Florida chapter and an active vintage baseball player. He formed the Fort Myers Vagabonds, a well-known team now in South Florida. Throughout Collier County, it's very famous people. In 24, and he was the organizer for the Vintage Baseball annual meeting held in Fort Myers in 2024. Tonight, his topic is the U.S. Navy Baseball 1864 to 1910. I've seen the slides. It's a really fascinating kind of tale that we go through as we pick up pieces. Kevin, if you will, bring your hit the share screen and bring your slides up, and we'll get started.
Very good. Thanks, Bob. Yeah, that's probably a good way to describe what I'm going to talk about tonight. Is kind of a historical tale of U.S. Navy baseball, mostly 19th century, but we'll stray into the 20th century just a little bit. These are the topics I'm going to talk about tonight. A little bit on the Civil War, then we'll go into the U.S. Naval Academy, and we'll talk about a few specific ship teams, things that were changing after the Civil War, just prior to the Spanish-American War. We'll touch on the Spanish-American War, and then finish up with a little bit on the Great White Fleet era, Teddy Roosevelt. So I think you're all familiar with this database called Protoball out there on the internet, which is really the objective of that database is to capture all kinds of primary and secondary information on playing ball all the way up through 1870s, and trying to capture the references for people's research, etc. And that's what I started with when I looked at the Civil War and the U.S. Navy. And I found at least 500 accounts of Union Federal Army troops playing baseball during the Civil War. I think we've already had a talk on the Civil War baseball. A small number on Confederate troops, Army troops. No accounts of Navy playing ball, and one federal U.S. Marine Corps account, which I'm going to go over tonight. So really nothing turned up as far as sailors playing baseball in the Civil War. And that's, the troops from up north, especially New York area, Pennsylvania, were familiar at this time with the game. So federal troops from the Northeast, as they moved south, when they had free time on their hands in camp, they played some baseball and they taught the game to their fellow soldiers while they were in camp. And there's also famous reports of federal troops, Union troops, Army troops playing baseball in Confederate prisoner camps, and in the process started to share the game with those who grew up in the South. And there not being any Navy accounts in the protoball database, as you could attribute that to well, the Navy, they're on ships, they're at sea, right? They're not going to be playing baseball, but they're blockading southern ports, and there's also U.S. Navy ships sailing around the world looking for Confederate raiders, so not spending much time on land. However, during the Civil War, there were a lot of Army and Navy joint operations on the rivers. So Navy sailors came in contact with Army troops quite a bit during the Civil War, on the inland rivers in the U.S. And so there's, I guess I hold out chances that in the future, as diaries become available and letters get transcribed and start to get added to our history of baseball in the Civil War, that maybe some Navy accounts of sailors playing baseball will turn up. So what I'll talk about now is this U.S. Marine Corps Marine, Frank Linnaeus Church, in 1864. He kept a diary of the Red River Campaign. And the Red River Campaign was a three-pronged attack by the U.S. Army and Navy, starting with troops moving down the Mississippi River from Vicksburg. Admiral Porter was in charge of the flotilla. There was troops commanded by General Smith, 10,000 troops coming down the Mississippi. General Banks came with Army troops from New Orleans, and General Steele came with Union Army troops from the Northwest towards Shreveport. So the idea was to converge and move up the Red River and sort of capture the Confederate armies in between. That was the plan for the Red River expedition. So the Union Mississippi Squadron, it was called, left Vicksburg to reach the mouth of the Red River. They sailed between March 1st and March 10th, 1864. And it was commanded, as I said, by Rear Admiral David Porter. It was a big flotilla, 90 vessels, 10 ironclads. And, it was a significant force moving down the river, and 10,000 Army troops under General Smith. The expedition was slated to start on March 10th, 1864. And this is the picture of Admiral Porter, and we're going to see him a little bit later on. But this is Admiral Porter's sort of flagship, this big riverboat, the USS Black Hawk. And Lieutenant Frank Church was the commander of the Marine Guard on this U.S. steamer, Admiral Porter's flagship. So it was a big, roomy ship. Admiral Porter could have lots of room for meetings and things like that. So this is where Lieutenant Church comes into the picture. This is him. He's 19-year-old here in 1864, so he's a little 3 years older in 1864. In his diary, he says on March 1st that the USS Black Hawk arrived at the Red River March 1st. March 3rd, in his diary, he said, went on shore at 10:30 this morning and played baseball for about 3 hours. At 3 p.m., we practiced with the revolver. Several Secesh ladies, meaning Southern ladies from a plantation in the neighborhood, came up on horseback to see the ship. Two of them were beautiful and rode splendidly. Wrote a letter to Alice. Alice was his fiance, so maybe he felt a little bit guilty after that. March 10th, his diary said, went out in the afternoon and exercised my men in company drill and then played a game of ball. So this is the entry in his diary about playing ball during the Civil War, waiting for the campaign to start, which on March 12th in his diary said the squadron got underway up the Red River. Now, in just my reading about the Navy and the Civil War and trying and putting together my research, I actually was reading a book about the USS Kearsarge, which during the Civil War spent most of his time in European waters, and it was on the lookout for Confederate raiders. And it actually took part in the famous battle off of Cherbourg, France, where the Kearsarge sank the Confederate ship Alabama, a raider off of the coast of France. So that's it's what it's famous for. But there was a lot of time spent in European waters, a lot of sort of boring time for the sailors. And in early 1864, they were undergoing repairs in Cadiz, Spain. So the big battle was in the summer. So early in the year, 1864, they're in port getting worked on. They're in dry dock, and the crew was given permission at the noontime and evening to do athletics on the wharf. So they were given permission to get off the ship and do some exercise. And one of the things they did was play ball using improvised equipment. And this was noted in a diary by Cole Heber on board ship Charles Poole. He saw the game, he liked the game because it reminded him of the game when he was a boy. So this is 1864. If he's probably thinking about the 1850s. So he was seeing the game played in the 1850s when he was growing up. And here he is in Spain. And so this is actually one account of sailors, U.S. Navy sailors playing ball. They're not playing in a big old field, but they're making do with what they can on the wharf next to the ship while it's under repairs. So what's interesting about this time is that crews on board commercial ships were mostly, and American ships and foreign ships were a combination of U.S., say, citizens and foreign folks. There was, demand for sailors, whether it was the whaling fleet, commercial vessels. You had experienced sailors and you had lubbers. You had land lubbers that came on board and learned the job on the job. But when the war broke out, the U.S. Civil War, there was a demand for sailors growing in the fleet. And actually, the Navy Secretary in September 1861 authorized the enlistment of blacks into the Navy, made it official. And over the course of the year of the war, there was 18,000 black sailors, about 20% of the fleet, including 11,000 former slaves and 7,000 free men. So this was the sort of the makeup of the crews in those days. And I just posed this hypothetical. I live down here in Fort Myers, and this is a piece of research that I want to pursue in our historical society down here for any letters or anything in the official records of the Army or Navy. But the hypothetical is, could they have played baseball here in Fort Myers during the Civil War? In 1864, there was a garrison here in Fort Myers. Their job was basically to break up the Confederate trade of cattle. They supplied the Confederates. Florida supplied cattle to the Confederate armies, and a lot of times they were put on ships and sailed north. So the U.S. Army was here to kind of break up that movement of cattle. But what's interesting is the troops that were here in 1864 were from New York. So those guys, the 110th New York Volunteer Infantry, you know, high probability that some of them knew about baseball. They're from Osceola County, New York. They were also here with U.S. 2nd U.S. Colored Infantry, so black unit was at the fort as well. And not only that, the Navy came into the mouth of the Caloosahatchee River and the Peace River here to supply the troops, but they also were hunting for contraband, Confederate contraband. So there was this interaction between the Navy, the Army, white troops and black troops right here in Fort Myers, and they probably had a lot of downtime as well. So that's just a little side note, something that I want to pursue to see if there's anything that indicates that they may have played ball together. So that's my bit on the Civil War. Now, what's interesting, I already introduced you to Admiral David Porter. He brought the flotilla down from Vicksburg for the Red River campaign. He becomes the superintendent at the U.S. Naval Academy in 1865, right after the Civil War. And he introduces athletics and social functions to the academy, to like what the midshipmen are doing at the academy. And that included baseball. So I wonder if you saw our Marine lieutenant playing baseball there right before the Red River campaign, or maybe he had his own exposure to baseball, but I think it's an interesting potential linkage there. What they start up in 1866 is basically intramurals. It'd be like the first classmen playing the second classmen. So it was just there on campus. And my references for these are the U.S. Naval Academy. Before they had an actual yearbook called the Lucky Bag, they had just a photo album. So it didn't have much in the way of text, just had lots of photos. But then there was also the Lucky Bag yearbook started in 1894. So that's the reference. So these are sort of the intramural teams from class of 71, the champs 69 to 70, class of 73. You can kind of see the numbers on their baseball uniforms. So this is just what we would call intramurals today. The one thing is they have pretty impressive, pretty spiffy looking uniforms, that's for sure. Now, there's really not much information until we get up into the 1890s. So I'm not sure what goes on at the academy in the 1880s as far as baseball. But the first mention of the academy baseball players playing baseball outside of the academy itself is in 1893. And I've got some of the lists of the teams that they played. 1893, they played 10 games. They won 6, lost 4. And it also showed kind of how some of the players, whether they had returning players, what kind of consistency they had in their teams going from year to year. They played some outside colleges, like Johns Hopkins, for instance, and Dickinson. They also played some YMCA teams and probably some local ball teams. And as the years went on from 1893 to 1896, they were playing mostly other universities as time went on. But when you get to 1897, 1898, the administration basically discontinues the playing of games outside of the academy. They're basically, even though, they're not playing a lot of games, and they're about, 500 or so as far as their performance. But what the administration wanted to do is to somehow start to develop more talent, identify talent and develop talent. And so what they do is there's a couple pictures here of the 1895 team, 1896 team. What they start to do is they really stop playing the interclass baseball, and they start to play by divisions. So there's 4 divisions in the academy, and each division is a mixture of first year midshipmen, second year, third, and fourth. So it's a more of a mixture of players instead of just your first year, second year. So the last year that they talked about division level play in the lucky bag is 1897. So they get away from the intramurals as where they're going to find their talent, and they go to division play, which is more of a mixture for them. So in those 2 years they take off, this is what they're doing. And in the yearbook itself, if you look at the yearbook, football dominates, like especially the Army Navy game, and baseball really doesn't have much of a entry. But starting around 1898, baseball starts to get more pages in the yearbook, which is interesting. And there's some interesting comments from the I guess the editors of the yearbook saying baseball at the Navy Academy, this is in 1898, can scarcely be said to be in its zenith of its glory. 97's graduating class weakened the team and took from us what pitchers we did have. And in 1900, they go on to say, the first essential of a successful baseball team is good material, which from which to choose, which this we had. The second is constant practice. And I think this is one of the issues. The Navy Academy, even in those days, was pretty demanding. And so there wasn't a lot of time to practice before the season came along. But they started to work that into the system going forward. And at this point, I guess they felt confident enough they're actually trying to get a game with West Point, which in 1900 they were not successful, but the next year they will be. So this is where they're back out there playing outside the academy. You can see that they played Lafayette, University of Pennsylvania. So it's not all university teams, and there's not too many games still, only 7 games. But from this point on, really, what Naval Academy baseball kind of is established and starts to take off. They get a coach in, someone who knows baseball. It's not just the faculty that's their coaches. They have tryouts, 2 weeks of tryouts. They get some returning players. They pick some new players. They've got the indoor gym to do some practice. So they're really kind of starting to become a real college baseball team, so to speak. In 1901, they play Army for the first time now and lose, but in 1902, they beat them. So this is a picture of the 1902 game. And I guess it's really when we get past 1902 that they're firmly established. This was the first game with West Point, and it was a big deal in the yearbook that they finally got to play West Point, just like their football team. In the 3rd inning, with the bases full, Army's Hobson hit a long fly, scoring MacArthur from 3rd. And this is future General MacArthur, who played in the game. A poor relay to home also scored Phillips. Hare followed with a single for Army's 3rd run. So future Army General Douglas MacArthur was a left fielder during the game. So 1903 onwards, midshipmen are getting funding from their athletic association. They're starting to play more games, and just the pictures in the yearbook show, quite a crowd at their matches. And you can see they're playing 19 games with for the most part, all college teams. So by 1903, baseball at the Naval Academy is sort of firmly established. And then this is just a program from 1938 Army Navy baseball games, and it lists all the games from that 1901 first game with Army all the way up through 1937. So after the Civil War and after we talked about the Naval Academy, I wanted to talk about what I call ship teams. So after the Civil War, U.S. Navy ships pretty much operated as single ships. They were sent down the Caribbean, overseas, but they were individual ships. That's like through the 1870s. In the 1880s, as the U.S. fleet starts to modernize, they also start to group ships into squadrons. So you have multiple ships moving around, working together. And an example of that is the North Atlantic Squadron, which is formed to patrol the Atlantic and the Caribbean. So the ships, the individual ships, but then the squadrons, they're training together. They're doing maneuvers together. They're doing target practice together. They're working as a team of ships. But they're also starting to socialize, the sailors, and they're conducting sports competitions between them, like rowing, and baseball becomes a real competition between the ships. And Gordon Calhoun, he was a historian and curator at the National Museum of the United States Navy, mentioned that organized leagues can be seen as far back as the 1880s, 1890s. They're very competitive between ships, with trophies and banners, and it was quite the thing that developed as these ships started to operate together in squadrons. Example of that is the USS Colorado. It was on the Asiatic station, so this was over off the coast of Korea, Japan, China, from 1870 to 1873. It was a flagship of Rear Admiral Rogers. He carried our U.S. minister to China in 1871. Carried him on a diplomatic mission to Korea, and actually got themselves into a little shooting episode. The two ships from the squadron were fired on by Korean shore batteries, and the USS Colorado returned fire. So they've seen a little bit of unplanned action while they're on station. But what's interesting, Mike Galbraith, who was a researcher of Western sports in Japan, found a newspaper article from October 30th, 1871. So this is this time period when the USS Colorado was on Asiatic station, detailing a game between a game of baseball between sailors from the USS Colorado and 9 civilians living in Yokohama. And then Rear Admiral Rogers himself wrote a letter to his wife mentioning the crew of the USS Colorado playing baseball on the deck. So at the same time period, October 1871. And this is similar to the Horace Wilson is an U.S. educator in Japan, is typically credited with bringing baseball to Japan, and using it as a form of exercise for his students. So this is a little bit, pretty much the same period of time that U.S. sailors were playing here in Yokohama. And if you look at the Japanese newspaper account of the game, it's interesting because they say that the ground selected was on a swamp. It was very slippery, so it wasn't optimal conditions. They played 4 innings in the game. This is another ship, the USS Powhatan. It was on in 1880s. It was off of Cuba, decommissioned in 1883. And this is just a picture of the team there. I've got a couple of these in here. So, and you can see they got nice uniforms, equipment. They got the P on their breast for the ship, the Powhatan. And this is the USS Chicago, commissioned in 1865. It cruised in the Mediterranean and the North and South Atlantic and the Caribbean. And this is the baseball team here, the 1889 baseball team with Chicago across their chest of their uniforms. So this is this period where U.S. Navy ships now are working together as squadrons, and these baseball teams are going to compete against other ships for those trophies and for the renown of maybe winning their squadron's title. Another ship, and we'll talk more about this one, is the USS Olympia. This eventually becomes Admiral Dewey's flagship for the Asiatic Fleet. It's going to be involved in the Spanish-American War. But this is the USS Olympia is in Philadelphia Harbor. It's the only remaining Spanish-American War era ship that there is. But this is the team here, the 1896 team. You see they've got a pretty interesting crest embroidered on their uniforms, and we're going to see these guys again too. So that takes us to the Spanish-American War and the battleship USS Maine and the cruiser USS Marblehead. Um, these two ships arrive in Key West, Florida in December of 1897, and they're going to play for the Atlantic Squadron Championship in Key West, Florida. And this is a map from its day, a lithograph of Key West. And we're looking to the east towards the Atlantic Ocean. And there's the Navy Yard down here at the bottom of the picture, and the Army Fortress, Fort Zach Taylor over here on the right side. So the ships would have come into the Navy Yard here. They'd have played ball somewhere in the locale of the Navy Yard. So they arrive, both of them arrive on December 15th, 1897. And in that period, December, January, while they're in port, the Maine's baseball team played other ships. They also played a local baseball team called the Boys from Key West. And on April 9th, they play their championship game against the USS Marblehead. They defeat the Marblehead team 18-3 to win the North Atlantic Squadron Championship. And that's described over here in the right in the newspaper write-ups. The Maine had a star pitcher, a black pitcher, William Lambert, who was described by one of his shipmates as a master of speed, curves, and control. And then when they eventually head to Havana, the Marblehead, or excuse me, the Maine, they're also planning on playing some Cuban All-Star team when they're down in Havana. I have the deck logs from the USS Marblehead, and I reviewed those, and there's no mention of what's going on shore. They just mentioned the crew going on leave and all the supplies coming and going, kind of your typical deck logs for a Navy ship. They don't mention anything about the actual games that were being played. It was all what was reported in the local newspapers. This is a picture of the USS Maine's baseball team, the USS Maine 9. I've identified everybody that I can in the picture. So there's some players, I'll have their names. I can't actually identify all the players in the picture. But here's William Lambert, the pitcher up in the upper right. The fellow in the center is their manager. There's another manager, assistant manager down at the lower right. Got a arrow to the third baseman, Newton, their second baseman and captain, Gorman, John Bloomer in right field, and their catcher, Marston, here on the right center. And then these are all the names of the team, and I put the pictures next to the fellows that I can identify in that picture. So you've got Landsman, or excuse me, you got Tinsman, whose rank is a landsman. He's from Maine. Out in left field and center field, you've got Hawk from Brooklyn. There's John Bloomer, which I identified. I don't have where he was from. Shortstop, you've got Mertz from Brooklyn. Gorman, their captain from Boston. There's a bugler. He's a Marine Corps bugler. He's third base. There's Lambert, the pitcher. First base, we got Ho from New York. And then their managers, and then their catcher, Marston from Jersey City, New Jersey. So the USS Maine departs Key West and arrives in Havana Harbor on January 25th, 1898. Orders from the War Department, and they're there to reassure U.S. citizens and show the flag, and because there's been this shooting war between Cuban independence fighters and the Spanish, and things are getting hot, and the USS Maine goes down to Havana Harbor, And then about 3 weeks later, it explodes in the harbor on February 15th. It sinks, explodes and sinks, killing 260 of the crew, and eventually sparks one of the reasons for the initiation of the Spanish-American War. The lone survivor from the baseball team is the right fielder, John Bloomer. So what's interesting is shortly before the explosion, the Marine Corps bugler, Newton, he would have sounded taps around 9:10 p.m. as usual, shortly before the ship actually exploded. There was another baseball player on board, Yeoman Third Class John Shillingham. He was from Chicago, and he was a shortstop with Notre Dame. Obviously, I don't have the details of why he wasn't on the ball club, but he died in the explosion. So the Spanish-American War starts. I already mentioned Commodore Dewey and his flagship, the USS Olympia. They've been in the Pacific since 1895. So this is 1898. So they're familiar with their station. They've been playing ball already. They've been competing against expat team, military teams. They play baseball. They play soccer, all the way from Hong Kong to Japan. So there's a lot of athletes on that ship. 1898, some local Shanghai players have been begging them to, when they come into port, to play them in a game of baseball. They actually beat a English expatriate team in soccer in Hong Kong. So they're, like I mentioned, there's some athletes there. But I think effectively in May 1898, shortly after the Battle of Manila Bay, the first baseball games are played in the Philippines by sailors and Marines from Dewey's ships, within a week of the May 1st Battle of Manila Bay. So for Japan, the Navy's playing baseball there, but they're not necessarily attributed to introducing baseball to Japan. I'm not an expert on that subject, but they're playing baseball in a similar time frame. But here in the Philippines, I think you can say that the U.S. Navy introduced baseball to the Philippines, and that's based on my reading of Reeves' book, which is called "Taking in a Game," which is about baseball in Asia. So May 1st, big battle, Manila Bay, Spanish fleet's destroyed. And the Olympias, their baseball team's called the Diamond Diggers. They start playing baseball once they're back in port there, when things settle down a bit. They play 5 official games while they're at Cavite Naval Base, which is, I've got starred here on the map, in the northern Philippines, between May and October 1898. Notably, they have 3 wins against the Army, the 18th U.S. Infantry Regiment. But they had 2 losses against the USS Colorado, and we've already seen the USS Colorado playing ball in Japan. And then in this October 1898, basically the crew gets broken up and sent to other assignments, and the ship leaves the Asiatic station. But before that, they beat the USS Utah 7-5, and that's their final win. So the Olympia is playing and other ships in the Asiatic fleet here are playing a kind of a key role in bringing baseball to the Philippines. The Spanish-American War, also one of the first landings that was done was by the U.S. Marines into Guantanamo, Cuba, which over time becomes a U.S. naval base. But also becomes a place where a lot of the North Atlantic Squadron play their championship games. So lots of photographs of in this case the USS Prometheus versus the USS Relief in 1898, playing ball at Guantanamo. So the last topic I'll get into here is what we call the Great White Fleet era. And we've already seen that ship-to-ship competition and fleet championships is becoming an important an important competition, something the sailors look forward to. And when they're in foreign ports, they're playing baseball, let's say when they have time, and it's unofficial, but it becomes a form of what's called soft power, where local people see the sailors playing ball, and it's a form of entertainment, and they might get interested in the game themselves. I have a picture here of the USS West Virginia armored cruiser commissioned in 1905. It's the Pacific Fleet flagship, and as we'll see, they've got a great baseball team, and they win the Pacific Fleet flag championship for quite a number of years in a row. And again, this is the 1905 USS Brooklyn. This is from the New York Times, 11th of January, 1905. And it's heralding the USS Brooklyn as the North Atlantic's second squadron champs. They defeat the USS Kearsarge from the battleship squadron and the USS Tacoma from the Pacific Fleet. So they've won the Atlantic side and they've won the Pacific side. They would still need to play the USS Wisconsin over on Asiatic Station, which for practical purposes, they can't. They'd be sort of the world champs of Navy baseball if they could do that. But anyway, they're effectively the baseball champs of the Navy in 1905, the USS Brooklyn, and they get lots of press for that reason. So here's Teddy Roosevelt's Great White Fleet. He sends the Atlantic Battleship Fleet, 16 battleships on an around the world cruise in 1908. They're starting in Hampton Roads, Virginia in December 16th, 1908. And they kind of head south to South America, around up into Mexico, the west coast of the US, and then off to Asia, Australia, India, up into the Mediterranean and home. There was a lot of ceremony associated with the Great White Fleet. When they come into port, there was a lot of hoopla. They had a lot of like very structured functions that they went to, dinners. But occasionally, when nothing was so formal, they could just play ball. And they did that in Trinidad at the beginning of the tour when there wasn't much going on. In Australia, they played some local teams. In Ceylon, there was some sort of World Series that was organized amongst the ships. And when they came up to Magdalena Bay in Mexico, they also played baseball there. And this is a picture of Magdalena Bay. This was routine for U.S. Navy ships in this area to come into the bay and have target practice. I'm not quite sure what the Mexican government felt about that, but it was done a lot. And they also used the area to play ball. And here's the USS Tennessee and the USS Washington in November 1908 playing ball in Magdalena Bay. This is the USS West Virginia, the armored cruiser that I mentioned. They were the Pacific Fleet champs in 1909, 1910, and 1911. And this is them again in Hawaii. So they've got some great uniforms and equipment, sweaters, they're all decked out. And then, as I mentioned, the Atlantic Fleet commonly used Cuba, Guantanamo Bay, for their championships. This is a picture from Guantanamo Bay, Cuba in 1912. So hopefully this kind of gives you like as Bob said, kind of a tale of U.S. Navy baseball during this period from the Civil War up through the start of the 20th century. So thanks a lot. Appreciate your time.
Kevin, thank you very much. If you would right now take your slides down and we'll get some comments and questions if we've got a few here. Let's see. Sean Hennessy notes that he recognizes a scorecard that you showed.
Yeah,
Cool.
that was mine.
Okay, brilliant.
I love the presentation. Sorry I missed the first 15, 20 minutes of it. Um, what prompted you to go into this? I'm just out of curiosity. What was your motivation for digging into this side of Navy baseball?
Yeah, well, I think it was my dad was in the Navy in World War II. That's kind of my Navy connections. I've always had that sort of um, maybe military history interest, and then me just being kind of a baseball fan like you guys. I'm also interested in like World War II, the the camps and the Coast Guard and Navy bases that propped up. Some of them popped up out of nowhere, and they had baseball teams. So it's all kind of in line with that. And and just in my reading it, you'll see an article like those pictures of the ships and the baseball teams would just come up in an article. I'm like, oh well, I wonder how much more people know about that. So yeah, that's where I was coming from.
That's great. I do a lot of this is kind of the area that I spend most
Uh-huh.
probably way too much of my time in
Yeah.
in military baseball, but
Hmm.
being a Navy veteran myself, that's my motivation playing baseball
Yeah.
when I was in
Yeah.
uniform. So
Yeah.
um, you probably see a lot of my my
Hmm.
work out there on the web. So yeah, you
Yeah.
got my scorecard. Yeah, it's cool. Great. Thank
Yeah. And you always wonder, like, gosh, how it'd be great if more of the scores and things had been captured.
No, it's definitely a challenge to research, especially going back as far as you've gone.
Yeah.
That's there's just nothing out there. And then so another follow-up question, if I don't want to take up time from anybody else, but I've been doing a lot of the early 20th century research. I have a lot of photographs, original photographs
Hmm.
and scorecards, things like that. But
Hmm.
I've been trying to find since the Atlantic and Pacific fleets would send their ships. They would obviously a lot of it was in Guantanamo Bay, but they also were using once the canal was open, they were using Panama
Yeah.
for their championships, but without going to
Hmm.
the East Coast. I'm over on the West Coast and spending time at the NHHC. There's really not a lot of research that's been performed to
Yeah.
determine. I'm looking for like the
Yeah.
championships, not just the squadron level, but and not just the fleet level, but at the top at the Navy level and seeing
Yeah.
who faced who.
Yeah.
I don't have anything that's very complete.
Right. Right. And it's mainly like newspapers, I guess, who would mainly cover that.
Yes, and scant.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank
Great.
you.
Thank you.
Sean, uh, uh, Pamela Baker notes, love this. She, I think she liked it. Uh, Great research, Navy on my dad's side, baseball on my mom's, plus a nephew. Go Navy. Uh, she has a favorite, it appears. Uh, Gary wrote that, have you come across anything about the naval career of Oscar Belaski? He was the first Polish American major leaguer, served in the Union Navy in 1864 to 66.
Hmm. No, no.
Yeah, great presentation. That was me.
Thank
Um,
you.
yeah, he served in I believe, a New York Cavalry regiment, but he was underage, got kicked out, and wound up joining the Navy when we came of age in '64. But I thought it was interesting. Always wondered if he learned how to play baseball when he was in the service.
Right.
And at the end of his baseball career, he was with the White Stockings in 1876. So he was the first Polish American that played pro ball.
Okay.
So I was wondering if you ever came across him at all. So.
No, I haven't really, outside of the USS Maine fellas, I haven't come across any players like that, like, specifically. Um, but I know that movement between the Army and the Navy was not uncommon, in the Civil War,
Yeah.
there was that. And I do believe, like, that there should be more um, in the record, diaries and letters of sailors who saw the game being played or whatnot, because there was so much of what the Navy did was on the interior rivers in the U.S., chock-a-block with U.S. Army troops. So, yeah, we'll see.
Woody Eckert asked, you mentioned a game versus 9 civilians in Yokohama. Were they American expats or were they Japanese? Or perhaps Nabi can help us with that history.
I shouldn't assume, but I assume that they were local Japanese folks, but I couldn't verify that just by reading the MLB article. I just assumed that.
Yeah, this is Nobi, and it was the October 30th of the 1871 in Yokohama, and the USS Colorado sailors played against foreign people who was living in the Yokohama concession at that time.
Okay.
So my new findings is about 10 months before that October baseball in 1871. And I will send you my presentation.
Thank you. Appreciate that. So they were foreigners living in Yokohama.
Yeah,
Okay.
October 1871. And the January 1871 games in Osaka, Kawaguchi concession was the game between the Osaka armies, Japanese armies, soldiers, against sailors of the USS Colorado. That is exactly the first ever baseball game ever played in Japan.
Okay. Well, that's excellent.
Just for background, we had mentioned it earlier. Nabi had made a wonderful presentation at the Fred a while back where he went through, and I believe that illustration you had of where the swamp was and the ball field laid out, that was part of Nabi's presentation.
Yeah, because then it then came out on the internet, bits of that. So that's where I saw it. I reference it in the back of my presentation. But yeah, I was hesitant to go into the Japan early baseball because I know that there's a lot to it. Not as much as the Philippines. Philippines seems fairly straightforward compared to Japan. It's more complicated.
Yeah, I was
Go ahead,
truly delighted to see Mr. Ito on this presentation. And Kevin, I would absolutely hope that you and Novi correspond with each other.
Yeah, for
because
sure.
there is such richness in this little tiny piece of history. The USS Colorado, of course, in 1871. Colorado is not even a state till 1876, but it was the pride of the Union that was a U.S. territory. So it's very, very interesting. One of the things that struck me was the number of African American sailors that were playing at a time in the 19th century when the color line had really been drawn in civilian baseball.
Yeah.
And I found that to be truly, truly amazing. I knew about the USS Maine's pitcher, but it seems to be much deeper than that. And that whole area would be such a rich area because there is a lot to go, that's being said now about African American baseball, in that period.
Yeah, no, I think there's a lot more to dig out. Yeah.
Andy Terrick put a note up here, very enthusiastic about the presentation. Great presentation, man. I want to figure out exactly who those other USS Maine players in the picture are. So, Andy, I'll tell you the slide presentation will be posted on the 19th century page in a day or so when the recording is listed, and you can pick that picture right out of there. Sean Hennessy and Woody Eckert echoed him to Nabi. I'd love to see the presentation as well. Noby, if you'll, if you can email me your email address, I will pass this along to anybody who writes me and does that rather than go through this. And it's just Bob Bailey at cox.net. And I'm on the front page of the newsletter is my email address also.
And then the back end of it has all of my references, the websites and books and what. I'm going to make sure that in my presentations that I give credit to everybody. So it should all be there.
It's an interesting, fascinating tale. You had, and it's not an easy one to put together. You've got to
Yeah.
go kind of far and wide
Yeah.
to search these things. Because a lot of these things are just little newsletters that a Navy squadron put out, or
Exactly.
a logbook entry somewhere. So you've got all sorts of things. This is a great example of what research is necessary to start to uncover some of these things. Thank you very much, Kevin. Fascinating,
Yep.
fascinating talk. Peter, if you'd like to close us out, we've got book club next week, and then the end of the speaker series season in May.
That's right. In fact, tonight, right after this presentation, Kevin's presentation, I'll be sending out a 1 week out notice for our next book review, which will be done by Mike Halpert of a game of Brawl, who was authored by our friend Bill Felber, who is actually on this tonight. So his book will be the subject of Mike's presentation 1 week from tonight. Then in May, we wrap up. It's hard to believe this, Bob, but we wrap up 5 full seasons of the 19th Century Baseball Speaker Series with a presentation.
We hoped it would last 1 year, and now we're getting ready to enter our 6th.
This was Bob's invention. What should we do during this pandemic? And we got it. He got it started. We'll have a presentation on the original Louisville Slugger about Pete Browning, about that book. I mean, well, about that topic. That'll be our 19th Century Baseball Speaker Series next month, in May the 13th. So, Kevin, I want to say this is an excellent presentation. I missed the first few minutes of it, but I thoroughly enjoyed the rest of it. And
Thanks for the invite. I appreciate it.
Let me close. There's a comment from Sean Hennessy on the chat. Prior to the 1890s, sailors, non-officers, were not enlisted in the same way that they are considered today. They fell under the Navy's Bureau of Navigation and managed more like equipment than personnel. While the color line was established, so was the line between officer and enlisted. And there's comments here from Woody Eckert and Kirk Weber about the wonderful presentation.
Thank you. My
Gentlemen,
pleasure.
thank you for everybody for coming out. As Peter said, one more in May before the summer hits us and we watch the pennant races a whole lot more closely. Thank you for spending an hour with us tonight.
good night,
See ya.
Mr.
Thank
Utah.
you.
Good night, all.
Take care.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Okay.